The wind howled down from the mountains, dragging sleet and dust across the valley. Caleb Rye leaned low in the saddle, hat brim dripping, coat stiff with trail salt. The old mare's breath steamed like smoke in the dark. He had been riding 3 days without sleep, thinking only of the fire that once waited behind his cabin door. When the ridge broke, he saw it. A faint orange glow through the storm. Home. He pushed the mare harder. The porch came into view between sheets of rain. That was when he saw the shape. A man slumped against the doorframe, blood pooled beneath him, red mixing with the storm water. Caleb swung down, boots splashing in the mud. The man's hat was gone, his gray hair plastered to his skull. A lawman's badge, cracked clean in half, hung from his torn coat. In his fist, a crumpled paper, soaked, blurred, but still readable enough. Caleb's own name printed across it. Wanted, alive. He froze. The storm seemed to quiet for a heartbeat. Then thunder rolled so hard it shook the porch boards under his knees. Caleb knelt beside the man. The stranger's pulse fluttered weak beneath his fingers. 1 breath, maybe 2 left. He looked old, older than justice itself. But his face was familiar in a way Caleb couldn't name. Hell, Caleb muttered, staring at that paper. Saving him meant sheltering the law. Leaving him meant letting a man die on his doorstep. The wind howled again, lifting the paper from the man's hand. It slapped wet against the wall before sliding to Caleb's boot. His own face stared back, blurred but unmistakable. He'd buried that past 2 years ago, or thought he had. He spat into the rain and pulled the stranger's arm over his shoulder. The man groaned but didn't wake. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and cold iron. The hearth was dead, the floor gritty from months of emptiness. Caleb kicked the door shut and laid the old man near the stove. He struck a match. The tiny flame quivered, then caught on dry kindling. Light crept across the room. Walls of raw pine, a rifle leaning in the corner, a single chair. His life reduced to silence and smoke. The man stirred. Blood seeped through the bandage Caleb pressed against his side. A deep knife wound, maybe from a skirmish on the trail. He worked fast, ripping his own shirt for cloth, heating a poker to cauterize. The smell of burning flesh filled the cabin. The man didn't scream, just clenched his jaw and whispered something, a name that hit Caleb like a bullet. Elias. Caleb froze. That was his father's name. Lightning flashed through the window, painting the room white for an instant. In that glare, he saw the badge again. The engraving scorched half away, but the letters, Marshal's Office, Red Creek County, still clear. Caleb poured water over the wound and leaned back, heart pounding. "Why'd you come here, old man?" he whispered. No answer. Only the storm. He looked again at the paper with his name. The edges curled in the firelight, turning to ash. He thought of the gallows in Red Creek, the jeers, the spit. The day he'd ridden out a branded man. He thought of the oath he made never to run again. The man's breath hitched. Caleb hesitated only a moment more. Then he slid a blanket over the stranger's shoulders, fed another log to the fire, and said quietly, as if to no one at all, "You'll sleep inside tonight." Outside, thunder cracked over the plains. Inside, the flames caught and steadied, casting 2 shadows on the wall. One young and restless, one old and fading, bound together by blood, storm, and a secret neither yet understood. The cabin filled with the sound of rain easing into silence. Caleb crouched beside the old man, his fingers slick with blood and mud. The wound ran deep along the ribs, knife work, not gunfire. Whoever had done this wanted him to suffer. Caleb worked in silence. He'd stitched horseflesh, mended his own cuts on the trail. But human wounds were another matter. He tore a strip from an old flour sack, pressed it hard against the gash, and waited for the man to breathe again. The stranger's chest barely moved. Then to a whisper soft as the dying fire. "Elias!" Caleb froze. The name hung in the air like smoke. He stared down, heart hammering. Elias Rye, his father, dead near 10 years now. A drunkard to some, a scapegoat to others. But hearing that name in this voice felt like someone reopening a grave. "You knew him?" Caleb asked. The man didn't answer. Just exhaled, long and shallow, until the sound faded into the wind. Caleb leaned close. No more words came. He wasn't sure if the man had passed or simply fallen deeper into sleep. He sat back, staring at the hearth. The coals glowed dull red like eyes in the dark. He tossed another log on the fire, the crackle masking the sound of his own heartbeat. Outside, the wind shifted. Wolves howled far off, thin, echoing cries that carried through the timber like ghosts. Caleb glanced toward the door, hand instinctively resting on the revolver hanging near the mantel. He looked again at the lawman's badge glinting faintly in the firelight, half broken, just like the man wearing it. A part of him wanted to toss it into the flames and be done, but another part, the quiet, stubborn part that still believed in right and wrong, couldn't. He dragged the wanted poster from the table. His own name stared back at him in the flicker of fire. He folded it once, twice, then pried up the loose plank by the bed and slid the paper underneath. Buried again. Sleep, he muttered to himself. Just sleep, but sleep didn't come. He sat in the chair, gun across his lap, eyes fixed on the man's chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. When dawn finally broke, pale light spilling through the frosted window, Caleb's shoulders ached. The fire was down to embers. The man stirred, a twitch first, then a groan. Caleb moved closer. The lawman blinked at him, confusion clouding his face. Where am I? Safe enough, Caleb said. The man tried to sit up and winced, clutching his side. His voice rasped like dry paper. You dragged me out of hell, son. Storm did most of the dragging, Caleb said, pouring him a tin cup of water. The lawman drank slow, staring at Caleb as though searching for something he couldn't name. You from Red Creek? Caleb hesitated. Used to be. A smile ghosted across the man's lips. Then you must be Elias's boy. Caleb's stomach turned cold. You knew him? Knew him, the man said, eyes softening. Worked beside him. Best deputy that county ever saw. He saved my life once. Never took credit. Caleb said nothing. His father had died branded a thief, the town spitting on his grave. Hearing praise now felt like salt rubbed on an old scar. Name's Dugan, the man added after a moment. Marshal Dugan. Caleb nodded stiffly, masking the storm inside him. Rest, Marshal. You'll need your strength. He rose, crossed the room, and pushed open the door. The cold bit through his shirt. In the early light, the ground shimmered with frost, and beyond the fence line, wolves lingered in the trees, their eyes catching the sun like tiny lanterns. Watching, waiting. He shut the door and turned back to the bed. The marshal had fallen asleep again, breath shallow but steady. Caleb stood there, listening to it, that fragile rhythm between life and death, and felt something stir inside him he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Then the old man's lips moved once more. His voice was faint, but clear enough to cut through the silence. You've got your father's eyes, he said. Caleb's jaw tightened. He turned toward the fire, face unreadable as the light crawled up the cabin walls, catching the badge, the blood, and the truth he didn't yet want to see. The storm didn't pass. It thickened. By morning, the valley lay buried under white silence, snow piled to the windowsills, roof groaning beneath its weight. Caleb split kindling in the lean-to until his hands went numb, the axe biting clean through frozen wood. Every swing echoed against the mountains and came back hollow. When he returned inside, frost steamed from his coat, and the old marshal was awake, staring into the fire like a man measuring the years he had left. You saved me, Dugan said quietly. Caleb poured black coffee into 2 tin cups. Storm did most of it. Dugan's hands trembled as he lifted the cup. The smell of coffee filled the room, rich and bitter, a smell that belonged to men who had seen too much. Name's Marshal Dugan, he said again, as though staking his claim on being alive. I owe you. Caleb only nodded, set a pot over the flame, and busied himself with small chores. The cabin felt smaller with another breathing soul inside. 2 men, 2 ghosts, both hiding from something. Hours passed in slow rhythm. The scrape of a chair leg, the pop of resin in the fire, the ticking of melted snow dripping through the eaves. Dugan talked between sips, his voice cracked but steady. Saw a man once drag himself through a snowstorm with a bullet in his gut, he said. Told him he wouldn't make it. He told me he'd rather die free than live branded. Never forgot that. Caleb said nothing. His jaw worked as he cleaned the knife he'd used to cut bandages. The words hit too close. Dugan smiled faintly. You don't say much. Talkin's how men get killed, Caleb said. The old man chuckled, then coughed until his whole frame shook. Caleb steadied him, pressing a hand against his shoulder. Beneath the blanket he could feel bones and fever. Rest, Caleb said. I will, Dugan replied, when I've paid you back. A man ought to stand square with whoever drags him out of hell. Caleb met his gaze. You don't owe me. Still, Dugan went on, eyes narrowing, maybe I can do more than mend fences. Maybe I can help you clear that name. The words hung between them like smoke. Caleb's stomach turned. The poster under the floorboard seemed to burn through the planks. He forced a shrug. Don't know what you mean. Come now, Dugan said, easing back into the chair. No man builds a cabin this far out unless the world's given up on him, or he's given up on it. Caleb took his cup to the sink, letting the water freeze against the rim before answering. Maybe I just like quiet. Dugan didn't press further. He only nodded, eyes following the snow drifting past the window. Quiet's good, he said softly. But it can turn mean on a man after too long. The day dragged. They spoke little. Caleb chopped more wood, melted snow for water, cooked beans that stuck to the pan. Dugan read from a worn Bible he carried in his coat, whispering the words under his breath. Once, Caleb caught him tracing the name Elias Rye written faintly inside the cover. That night, as the wind keened through the chimney, Caleb wrapped the marshal's ribs again. The old man winced but didn't complain. You've got steady hands, he said. Work teaches that, Caleb muttered. Work or guilt? Dugan asked. Caleb didn't answer. When the bandage was tied, Dugan sat still for a long while, staring into the fire. The flames threw his shadow long across the floorboards, a crooked figure that trembled with every flicker. You ever think, Dugan said quietly, that a man can outrun justice but never himself? Caleb's throat tightened. He looked at the marshal, then at the window. Outside, wolf tracks circled the fence, restless shapes moving in the blue snowlight. He set another log on the fire, the crackle sharp in the silence. What crime? Dugan asked finally. Keeps a man this far from town? Caleb stood motionless. The flames reflected in his eyes like sparks on steel. He said nothing, only stared into the fire, jaw clenched, as if daring it to speak the truth he never would. The wind howled again, louder this time, and somewhere in that sound the wolves answered, a lonely chorus that filled the night with the kind of sorrow only the frontier could hold. By the third day, the snow began to soften, crusts of ice breaking loose from the roof in dull thuds. The storm had passed, but the world outside stayed colorless. Gray sky, gray pines, gray ghosts. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, steady. Dugan sat propped by the hearth, his coat draped across his knees, badge resting beside him like a relic from a life he no longer trusted. Caleb patched a split in the water bucket, each hammer tap echoing in the quiet. You work like a man serving time, Dugan said, voice gravel rough. Caleb didn't look up. Maybe I am. Dugan smiled faintly, then winced at the pull on his ribs. Your father used to say the same thing. About himself. Caleb froze mid-swing. You knew him well? Knew him better than most. Dugan's eyes glazed a little, lost somewhere years back. Elias Rye, deputy of Red Creek County. Straightest back I ever saw. Didn't bend, didn't bow. That's what got him killed. Caleb set down the hammer, heart pounding. The name sounded strange in another man's mouth. They said he stole county money. Ran off before trial, Dugan's expression hardened. That's the lie they told to bury him. The air thickened. The only sound was the hiss of sap popping in the logs. Caleb stared at the fire, jaw tight. Who's they? Dugan reached for his coffee, hand trembling just enough to spill a drop on the floor. Judge Halpern. You've heard the name. Caleb's stomach turned to stone. I've heard it. Back then, Halpern was just starting out, Dugan said. Ambitious, charming, talked like a preacher and robbed like a banker. County funds went missing, payroll for the railroad detail. Elias found the ledgers, tried to call it out. Halpern turned it around, pinned it on him. By the time I knew, the whole town wanted blood. He paused, the memory dragging through him like a nail. They called me to make the arrest. I couldn't do it, so I waited. Too long. Caleb's hands balled into fists. You're saying my father died running from a lie you helped build? Dugan looked down. He didn't run. He tried to clear his name. I found him weeks later, Northridge. Snowed half under, letters to the courthouse in his coat. Never mailed. The cabin swam in silence. The words hit Caleb like the butt of a rifle. All those years of hate, of shame, of carrying the name Rye like a curse, and now this. Why tell me now? He asked. Because I see him in you, Dugan said. Same way you cut wood straight down the grain. Same way you keep talking to nobody but the fire. Caleb turned away. His pulse roared in his ears. That man's been dead 10 winters, Marshal. Talking about him won't change what the world believes. Maybe not, Dugan said softly. But truth's a stubborn thing. Sooner or later it drags itself into daylight. Caleb crossed to the window. Outside, the snow glittered under a pale sky. The world looked clean, but he felt filthy. Judge Halpern, he repeated, testing the name like a taste of iron. He's still in Red Creek? Far as I know, Dugan said. Owns half the valley. Folks call him His Honor, like he's God Almighty. Caleb's reflection stared back from the frosted pane. The eyes, the scar on his jaw, the man he swore never to become. His father's son, after all. He turned back to Dugan. If he's still breathing, he said. Voice low, steady, dangerous. He'll answer for it. Dugan studied him a moment, then nodded once. Not approval, not warning. Just understanding. They sat in silence after that. Dugan fed a log to the fire. Caleb took his coat, stepped outside into the brittle light. The snow crunched under his boots, each step sinking deep. In the distance, crows circled the black pines like bits of smoke. He pulled his hat low and breathed the cold until it burned. The name Halpern rang in his chest like a church bell that wouldn't stop. Inside, through the window, he saw Dugan watching him, 2 men bound by guilt and blood, and a truth that had slept too long under the snow. The light faded. The day died quiet. Only the fire kept breathing. The thaw came slow. Snowmelt carved thin rivers through the yard, and the world began to breathe again. The pines dripped steady, roof shingles clattered loose under the sun, and for the first time in weeks the wind smelled like dirt instead of ice. Inside, Dugan was moving better, slow but steady, like an old clock finally finding rhythm. Caleb caught him at dawn, buttoning his coat and strapping on the holster that still hung a little crooked on his hip. You're leaving, Caleb said. Can't stay forever, Dugan replied, voice gentle but firm. The law's got to know I'm alive. They'll be searching bodies once the snow clears? I'd rather tell the story myself. Caleb leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. And what story's that? The true one, Dugan said, giving him a tired smile. A good man found me and saved my hide. Seems fair I tell it that way. Caleb said nothing. He watched the marshal gather his things, canteen, Bible, a pouch of tobacco. The man's movements carried the careful weight of someone rehearsing a goodbye he didn't want to say out loud. Outside, the horses waited under a pale sun. Caleb saddled the mare in silence, cinching the strap tight, jaw set. His plan had been forming all morning, ride north as soon as Dugan left. The marshal would head to Red Creek. If Caleb stayed, questions would follow. The leather creaked as he checked the packs. Trail's still soft, he said. You'll need to move slow, Dugan nodded. You'll stay put? Caleb's mouth twitched. For a while. It wasn't a lie, just the kind of truth a man tells when he's halfway out the door. They worked side by side for a few quiet minutes. The air held that strange peace that comes after a storm. Not joy, not sorrow, just quiet. When the saddlebag slipped open, it happened by accident. A gust of wind caught the flap, and the folded paper slid halfway out. The edge of a face showed through, Caleb's, rough and sunburned, printed above the word wanted. Dugan froze. Caleb reached for it. Too late. The marshal's gloved hand caught it first. He unfolded it slowly, eyes scanning the words. No sound but the creak of leather, the low groan of the mare shifting her weight. Caleb's pulse thudded in his ears. His hand rested near the revolver, though he hated himself for it. He waited for the lawman's tone to change, for the judgment to come. Dugan looked from the poster to Caleb. His expression didn't harden. It softened, the kind of look a man gives when he recognizes a wound he once carried. "So," Dugan said quietly. "It's true what they said." Caleb straightened. Ready to meet whatever came, Dugan held the paper out, then crushed it in his fist. A rye never runs. He walked back to the cabin, tossed the poster into the fire without ceremony. The flames took it fast, curling the edges black before swallowing the name whole. Neither man spoke. They watched the paper collapse into ash, watched smoke rise through the chimney and disappear into the blue. "That's supposed to mean something?" Caleb asked finally. "It means," Dugan said, pouring 2 cups of coffee, "some debts ain't settled by law." Caleb took the cup. The steam rose between them like fog on the river, softening the lines of their faces. For a moment, the world outside didn't matter. The wanted posters, the gallows, the lies. Only 2 men sat there, quiet, sharing warmth that wasn't earned but freely given. Trust, like fire, didn't need words to burn. When Dugan mounted his horse, he didn't look back. Caleb stood on the porch, arms folded, watching until the figure disappeared between the pines. The sky was turning gold. The air carried the smell of wet earth and smoke. Caleb looked at the chimney, at the faint wisp rising from it, thin, curling, disappearing into the light. He whispered under his breath, as if to the ghost of his name, "Let it go." The smoke rose higher, carrying Caleb Rye into the open sky, and with it, the man he'd been before Mercy found him. The days after Dugan's departure felt unnaturally still. The snow melted into deep mud, and the hills came alive with birds again, timid sounds, thin and uncertain after so much winter silence. Caleb mended fence posts, oiled the saddle, kept his hands busy to quiet the noise inside his head. He told himself Dugan was gone for good, that Mercy had left no shadow behind. But every time the wind shifted, the scent of smoke or leather brought the memory back. The old man's rasp, his laugh, the way he'd looked at him like redemption wasn't some story whispered in church, but a thing a man could touch. 3 mornings later, hoofbeats returned. For a moment, Caleb thought it was Dugan again. But when he stepped outside, he saw the marshal sitting astride a mule, looking thinner than ever and holding something small in his hands. "You came back," Caleb said. "Couldn't ride past," Dugan replied. "Had something to give you." He dismounted slowly, knees stiff, and unwrapped a bundle from his coat. Inside lay a small carving, rough pine shaped into a bird, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight. The wood was plain, but sunlight caught along its grain, turning it honey gold. "Made it while I was laid up," Dugan said. "Had to keep my hands working or go mad." Caleb turned the bird over in his palm. The carving was simple, but alive. Wings imperfect, one eye slightly larger than the other, yet it held a strange kind of grace. "Every man needs something that remembers light," Dugan said. "Even when he don't," Caleb stared at it for a long moment. He didn't believe in charms, but he believed in Dugan's voice and the quiet conviction beneath it. He hung the bird by the window, using an old bootlace. When the breeze came through, it swayed gently, wings catching the glow from the fire. "That'll do," Dugan said softly. "Keep it there," Caleb nodded. "You're staying a while?" "Just long enough to rest the mule," Dugan answered, though they both knew he was too weary to go anywhere yet. They shared coffee in silence. Dugan spoke of Red Creek, of letters sent, of whispers beginning to surface about Judge Halpern's dealings. "Men like him think they own the truth," Dugan said. "But the ground's shifting. Even the rich can't stand on rotten earth forever." Caleb said nothing. He didn't trust hope, but he felt it anyway. The kind that stirs when the world almost seems fair. Later that afternoon, they worked side by side repairing a section of roof torn loose by the thaw. The air smelled of wet pine and smoke. For a brief time, life felt almost ordinary. Then the wind changed. Caleb straightened on the ladder, eyes narrowing toward the distant ridge. Dust shimmered there, not windborne, but rising in rhythm, hoofbeats, multiple. Dugan shaded his eyes. Riders, Caleb climbed down fast. Maybe traders from the pass, but he knew better. The first glint of metal caught the sun, rifles slung high. The lead horse bore a red banner stitched with a black seal, a balanced scale above a crown. Halpern's mark. Caleb's stomach dropped. "You said you didn't tell them," he said quietly. "I didn't," Dugan swore. His face went pale. But word spreads fast when greed rides it. They stood there, frozen in the yard, the sound of the approaching posse rolling like thunder over the hills. "They know," Caleb said. "They're coming for you." "For both of us," Dugan's voice cracked with regret. "Mercy always costs, son." Caleb turned and entered the cabin. His boots echoed across the boards. The carved bird hung by the window, catching the late light, spinning lazily in the draught, casting a shadow that fluttered like wings on the wall. He knelt by the hearth, pried loose the same floorboard that once hid his wanted poster. Beneath it, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the revolver he'd buried months ago, the one he swore never to touch again. His hand hovered over it. The weight of old choices pressed heavy in his chest. Outside, Dugan called, "They'll reach us by sundown." Caleb closed his fingers around the gun. The cold steel felt too familiar. He rose slowly, holstered the weapon, and looked at the window one last time. The bird swung gently, its wings catching the fire's glow, gold one moment, shadow the next. The world outside darkened with dust and hoofbeats. Inside, the wooden bird turned toward the storm. Caleb whispered, almost to himself, "Every man remembers the light, until it burns." The sound reached them before the shapes did. The slow rhythm of hooves and harness, the metallic clatter of bits and rifles. Dugan leaned on the porch rail, face drawn tight. "They found us," he said. Caleb stepped out beside him, hand brushing the revolver at his belt. 5 riders crested the ridge, sun flashing on their badges. Halpern's men, not law, not mercy. Behind them came a wagon dragging chains and a gallows beam strapped across its frame. When they stopped in the yard, snow dust rose around their boots like ghosts. The leader, a sharp-faced deputy named Crowley, unrolled a paper stamped with the judge's seal. "Caleb Rye," he called, voice oily. "By order of Judge Halpern, you stand accused of murder. The courier you robbed outside Red Creek, you'll come quiet." Caleb stared at him. "Never seen your courier. Never robbed a soul." Crowley smirked. "That so? Then whose blood's on that coat?" He pointed toward the porch. Dugan's coat hung there, still stained from the wound that nearly killed him. The red looked fresh under the sun. "It's mine," Dugan barked, stepping forward. "Man's innocent. I'm Marshal Dugan, badge number 1217. This warrant's wrong, and you damn well know it." Crowley's grin didn't fade. "Judge said you'd say that. Said you were compromised, harboring a fugitive, losing your edge. We serve the bench now, Marshal, not your memory of it." 2 men dismounted and came toward Caleb, rifles low. He raised his hands, eyes cold. "You don't want this fight." They didn't listen. Chains rattled. Iron cuffs bit his wrists. The sound echoed like a sermon across the yard. Dugan tried to intervene, but Crowley shoved him back, laughing. "Careful, old man. Might hang beside him if you keep talking." Caleb stood still while they bound him, rope rough against skin, coarse fibers cutting deep. The smell of horse sweat and cold iron filled the air. He didn't resist. He'd learned long ago how fast justice turns to spectacle. Inside the cabin, wind caught the window open. The wooden bird Dugan carved swung on its string, creaking softly, wing cracked, one eye scorched from the fire's heat. It twisted in the draft, half light, half shadow. Crowley nodded toward it. "Nice ornament. Shame the house'll burn with it." "Don't touch that," Dugan snapped, voice breaking. The men laughed. They dragged Caleb toward the wagon, boots carving lines through thawing mud. The world blurred around him, the rope across his chest, the bite of metal cuffs. The echo of his father's name whispered in every jeer. "You're making the same mistake they made with Elias," Dugan shouted. "You're hanging the wrong man." Crowley turned, face dark with contempt. "Then history's keeping tidy records." He struck Dugan across the mouth with the butt of his rifle. The old marshal fell to his knees, blood bright against the snow. Caleb lunged, chains straining, but 2 rifles leveled at his head. "Stop!" Dugan gasped. "Don't give him reason." The men shoved Caleb into the wagon bed. Chains clanged against wood. The rope bit deeper. For a long moment, he stared at the horizon. The same ridge where his father's body had been found years ago, half buried in winter ground. The sun was setting there now, gold fading into ash. Inside the cabin, the wind howled louder, snapping the string. The wooden bird broke free and fell, wings cracked against the floorboards. Its carved eyes stared up at nothing. Caleb lowered his head. He could smell the rope, dry hemp, oiled for use. The scent filled his lungs like memory. Dugan crawled to his feet, voice raw. "They're hanging the wrong man again." Crowley spit into the dirt. "We'll let the judge decide that." The wagon lurched forward. The rope tightened around Caleb's wrists. Behind him, smoke rose from the chimney one last time, carrying the smell of coffee, pine, and the life he'd tried to build. The wooden bird lay shattered by the window, its shadow stretching long across the boards. The wagon rolled through the night. The cold bit through Caleb's coat and straight into his bones. By the time they reached Red Creek, frost silvered the rope around his wrists. The town looked smaller than he remembered, windows shuttered, lamps flickering against the dark like frightened eyes. At dawn, the bells rang. Not for worship, for judgment. They dragged him into the courtyard behind the courthouse, where a makeshift gallows waited. Rough timber, new rope, the smell of sawdust and pride. Judge Halpin stood at the center platform in a black coat trimmed with fur, his hands gloved, though the cold did not seem to touch him. The crowd gathered in silence, ranchers, widows, boys with pale faces. They all knew the name Rye. Halpern's voice carried smooth as oil. "Citizens of Red Creek," he began, "this morning we settle a debt long outstanding. The son of a thief stands before you, accused of murder and obstruction. Let the record show. Sin repeats its own bloodline." Caleb met his gaze without blinking. The man looked older than he remembered, lines carved deep from comfort, not labor, but the smile was the same, the kind that believed in its own righteousness. "Where's your witness?" Caleb asked. "Or is this another trial without one?" The judge motioned toward the crowd. From between 2 deputies came Dugan, coat torn, wrists bound, face gray with exhaustion. He limped forward but stood tall once he reached the platform. Halpern feigned surprise. "Marshal Dugan, back from the grave, I see. Come to confess, perhaps?" "I came," Dugan said, voice rough but steady, "to tell the truth you buried." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Halpern raised a hand. "You're a broken man, Dugan. Don't embarrass yourself." But Dugan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a weather-worn ledger, pages tied with twine. "These are the county books from the year Elias Rye died," he said. "Signed by you, Judge Halpern. I kept a copy. You altered the accounts, shifted the numbers, pinned it on him." Halpern laughed once, thin, brittle. "Forgery!" "Then prove it," Dugan snapped. "Let the town see your hands shake when you try." Retention spiked number 5. The crowd leaned closer. The silence deepened until even the wind stopped. Halpern's face lost its color. "You were supposed to destroy those." "I should have," Dugan said. "Instead, I destroyed a good man's name. Elias was innocent. I signed the arrest warrant that killed him." Caleb's breath caught. Dugan's eyes found his, full of apology and steel. "I was weak." "You won't be." Halpern drew his pistol in one smooth motion and fired. The crack shattered the morning. Dugan staggered back, a blossom of red spreading across his chest. He fell to one knee, ledger tumbling into the snow. For a heartbeat the world held still, then broke. The crowd screamed, deputies spun, confusion split the ranks. Caleb felt the rope slacken as a stray bullet cut it clean. He lunged, caught Dugan's pistol as it slid from his grasp, and turned on instinct. Halpern tried to fire again, but Caleb was faster. They collided, the gun twisting between them. Smoke, shouts, hooves pounding somewhere beyond. Caleb slammed the judge against the gallows post, his chains clanging like church bells. "You killed him," he said. Halpern's eyes were wide, disbelief replacing arrogance. "He was a traitor." Caleb struck him once, hard enough to drop the pistol from his hand. He caught it mid-fall, thumbed back the hammer. The barrel lined up with Halpin's heart. The crowd watched, breath held. Every muscle in Caleb's arm screamed to finish it, to end every lie, every scar. But Dugan's last words echoed in his head. "You won't be." He lowered the barrel just enough. The shot went off. Halpin screamed, clutching his leg as he crumpled to the ground. The bullet had shattered bone, not life. "You'll live," Caleb said, voice flat as stone, "to face what you built." Deputies dropped their rifles. The crowd surged forward, not in anger, but in something stranger. Relief. Men who once called Elias Rye a thief lifted the ledger from the snow, passing it hand to hand, reading the truth written there. Dugan lay on the steps, breath rattling. Caleb knelt beside him. "Easy," he said, pressing the wound. "Stay with me," the marshal's eyes fluttered. "Tell them." "Elias was a good man, I will." Dugan smiled once, small and tired. Then the light left his eyes. The sun climbed over the ridge, spilling gold across the courthouse walls. Snow turned to steam. Caleb stood slowly, chains broken, gun hanging loose at his side. Halpin groaned on the ground, his authority bleeding out with him. The people parted as Caleb walked through, no longer outlaw, not yet free, but something truer, a man who had faced the rope and cut it himself. Behind him, the gallows cast two shadows in the morning light, one for the judge who would answer, and one for the law that finally found its own reckoning. The gallows still cast their shadow when the sun cleared the ridge. The crowd that had come to see a hanging now stood silent, watching deputies lift the wounded judge into the wagon. Halpin's leg bled through his fine trousers, his face white with shock. The law he'd twisted turned on him at last. Dugan lay near the steps, blood seeping through his coat. Caleb knelt beside him, hands shaking though he didn't notice. "Stay with me," he whispered. Dugan's eyes fluttered open, already fading. "You did right," he rasped. "Don't let him make you run." Caleb pressed the wound. "You're gonna tell it yourself." A faint smile touched the old man's lips. "Tell them." "Elias was a good man." Caleb nodded, throat tight. "I will." Dugan's breath slipped out slow, shallow, then was gone. The morning wind lifted his gray hair like a benediction. Caleb sat there for a long moment, the weight of the man still heavy in his arms. His hands were red, but his heart, lighter somehow, emptied of anger, filled with something closer to peace. When he finally stood, the sun had burned through the mist, turning the frost to steam. Red Creek shimmered under the light, its streets glinting like they'd been washed clean. Men who'd once spit the name Rye now lowered their hats. No one spoke. He walked past them, slow, deliberate, as if the whole town were a graveyard and each step a prayer. At the gate he paused, looking back once more at the courthouse, its windows catching firelight, its gallows unmoving. Then he turned his horse toward the hills. By dusk he reached the ridge where the earth still bore two old crosses, one weathered gray, one freshly carved. He dug with his hands until the soil broke soft. The air smelled of pine and smoke. He laid Dugan beside his father, the two men bound by the same wound and now by rest. From his saddlebag he took the broken wooden bird, its wing cracked but still holding shape. He placed it on the grave between them. "Every man needs something that remembers light," Dugan had said. The bird caught the sunset, golden through its split wing. Caleb sat back on his heels, eyes burning, and whispered, "You both have it now." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from far off. The clouds above Red Creek glowed soft orange, then bled into blue. Somewhere down the valley a church bell rang for evening. He waited until it faded, then swung into the saddle. As he rode, a scrap of paper tumbled across the road, caught in the wind. He reached down and caught it. It was a wanted poster, edges torn, words half erased by rain. The face was blank now, no name, no crime, only empty parchment fluttering in his hand. He let it go. The wind carried it skyward, spinning until it vanished against the sun. Caleb turned his horse north, where the land opened wide and silent. He didn't look back. Behind him, the graves lay quiet beneath the bird's shadow, and for the first time in years, the air over Red Creek smelled not of blood or smoke, but mercy. The snows came and went before anyone returned to that stretch of valley. Spring rode in on a shy breeze, soft and damp, carrying the scent of wild sage. The cabin still stood, weathered but unbroken, its door half open as though waiting for someone who'd forgotten to come home. Two travelers reined their horses at the edge of the yard, a man and his wife, faces wind-chapped from the long road east. The woman pointed toward the porch. "Place looks empty," she said. "Has for a spell," the man answered. He swung down, boots crunching over the brittle grass. But someone lived here hard. Inside, dust floated in the light slanting through the rafters. The hearth was cold. The table still held 2 cracked mugs and a kettle gone dull with rust. On the floor by the window lay a single feather, carved from pine, pale as bone. The woman brushed the sill clean with her sleeve. "Someone carved that." "Looks that way," the man said. "Takes patience to make something that small." He picked it up carefully, turned it once in his hand, then set it back where it belonged, on the windowsill. The light touched it just right. The grain gleamed warm as honey. The carving had been mended, wing glued, edges smoothed, the small fault lines shining like scars made holy. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind whispered through the broken chinking in the wall, teasing at the lace of cobwebs, stirring the smell of old smoke and cedar. Then the breeze found the bird. It moved, just a fraction, rocking forward on the sill. The wing lifted, caught the air, trembled there as if remembering. Then it settled again, facing the open plains. "Looks like it's ready to fly," the woman murmured. "Maybe it already did," the man said quietly. They left the cabin as they found it, door ajar, air full of silence. When the hoofbeats faded down the trail, only the wind remained, threading through the grass and under the eaves. Outside, the valley shimmered with new growth. Wildflowers pushed through thawed earth where once the snow had buried everything. A hawk wheeled high above, shadow gliding over the field, wings wide against the sky. Inside, the bird on the windowsill caught the light again. Its wings gleamed, every curve alive with gold. The breeze rose stronger this time, sweeping through the open door, rustling the ashes in the hearth until they stirred like breath. The wooden bird rocked forward once more. Lifted, and for a heartbeat, just one, it hung weightless in the air. Then it settled back, still and shining, the echo of flight resting in its shape. In the distance, faint and far, came the steady rhythm of hoofbeats, slow, certain. Disappearing into horizon and haze, the sound faded, leaving behind only the wind and the whisper of a story ending where it began. A porch, a storm, and a promise kept. The bird stayed by the window, watching the dawn spread across the plains. In that small cabin no one would live again. Yet peace lingered there, quiet, merciful, whole. And when the next traveler passed, they would swear the little carving had moved. Its wings a little wider, its shadow a little freer, as if the man who made it had finally flown.